I did a general overview of Licorice Pizza, West Side Story, and of Belfast. Here I'm going to be more in depth on the films themselves and their Oscar prospects. I will preemptively say Belfast was the weakest entry. I will cover Belfast onto itself, but my judgment is it wasn't very good. It just wasn't. It just feels like he has name recognition, and that's it. So, what is going on with Licorice Pizza and West Side? Well, it's really fascinating. These are both coming of age stories. Paul is covering Southern California, and of course, Spielberg is adapting. But I think there's been a misunderstanding. He's not adapting the film, he's adapting the stage play. So they seem to be working from the script of the stage play. Now, I saw the movie West Side Story, but I had not seen the play, so it's a little hard to judge how well they updated the story. Because again, it's not really, as usually the case, him updating the film version with his version. It's updating more the core story from the script and the play and the way it's been performed. I have to say, of the two, Licorice Pizza to me was relatively better. Although both stories I found overall, what's going on with Valentine and Licorice much more engaging than West Side Story. I found almost no characters in West Side Story relatable, understandable, interesting, charming. A lot of people are saying these are path-breaking, star-making performances. I don't see any of that. They seem very talented and all that. They read the lines well enough. I don't sense they're either stars or they're the incredible thespians they're being made out to be. They're not terrible. I just didn't particularly care. Is one of the bad guys. But he was so over the top that it was very hard to even find him relatable or engaging. So it just seemed like a lot of caricatures. I realize this is a very melodramatic story, right? It's based on Shakespeare, but it just didn't feel dramatically engaging. And it's really shocking because Tony Kushner, usually I think his work is spectacular. I'm actually probably on the left, but I'm probably more moderate than he is. But I do appreciate his work in terms of combining this apocalyptic vision and leftist ideology and socialism with his Jewishness. And I think Angels in America is very brilliant, but and his work with Spielberg I don't like usually, but he's always very talented in crafting the screenplays. So the screenplays onto themselves are interesting, but not this one. They just felt kind of tired and rehashed. I realized he had to be sensitive to recalling the other version, but except in a few places, it didn't feel particularly clever or interesting. It could have just been the performances. The camera work is excellent. The way the camera glides in and out of dance scenes is amazing. The way they combine digital effects with seemingly real life in terms of the geography, because I live on the East Coast. So some of the places actually did feel real, very real, because I've been to Jersey and New York and various parts of it. So it definitely felt real in certain places. That was very impressive. So the camera work, the lighting, the costumes, that was all very well done. But the actual music, the sound effects, the sound design, the way it was mixed in terms of their singing and moving back between the acting, I didn't particularly care. Except in a few places, it didn't feel like very dazzling. But in terms of Spielberg himself and his cinematographer, they're at the top of their game. You just want to look at a very good visual masterpiece. That's what this is. But the narrative itself was just deadly dull. I didn't care. Wasn't particularly impressed by the twists. Felt really coming out of nowhere. And I'm going to put this in the top 10 of my list when I give my top 10, but it's at basically the very bottom. Strong, relatively speaking, but not one I want to revisit anytime soon. Licorice Pizza, by several measures, is a lot better. The acting's much stronger. The narrative is more engaging. I was very into how he's tracing the time period in the 1970s and using this child actor as an avatar towards a changing timeline. And that I found fascinating. I don't want to spoil too much of the movie, but it was really fascinating how basically his business exploits, for lack of a better term, nicely chart what's going on with California. Licorice Pizza apparently is named after a record store that was very popular back then, but are now defunct. There's a lot of interesting callbacks to these old stores, old haunts, historical landmarks, and so on and so forth. And the sensitivity to the time period is very brilliant and very funny. The way that these characters interact in terms of their different ethnic roots, their different ages, and so on and so forth. The biggest controversy here has been that there's an older woman pursuing a younger man. I myself am kind of indifferent. I just look at the story, but some people are disturbed at the implications of pedophilia. It's like, I didn't particularly think he was endorsing the relationship either. It's much more of a documentary feel. Yes, we're in the POV of the characters, but it is a kind of slice of life thing he's done before. Like Altman is a big influence on PTA, and we see that here again. And that's kind of the problem. I've seen this stuff before. It's been done better with Boogie Nights, Magnolia, especially Punch Drunk Love. That's really his one unvarnished romance, and this is another romance story, but I felt those were a lot stronger and better. Maybe it's because he was younger, he was more hungry, he was more dynamic. I'm not saying he's phoning it in. It doesn't feel lazy, it just feels like he's done this before. There's nothing wrong with an artist revisiting a theme they've done, but now that they've done it they did it really well before. I mean, again, to be consistent, Kubrick did this a lot. I mean, he literally made about 3 films within the genre of science fiction: Doctor Strangelove, Clockwork, and 2001, and they almost all said the same thing about his pessimism about human evolution, how stupid and crazy people are with their sexuality, and the way it leaks into national and international politics, the way imperialism is tied to high technology, etc., etc., etc. Kind of said the same thing throughout these 3 movies. And I'm like, they're very impressive, but if you think them through, they're like, okay, they're just variations on the Frankenstein story. And this seems like a variation on Magnolia, just with a smaller cast. It's impressive, very well shot, very beautiful, costume work, production work, set design, really impressive. The camera design, the way the camera moves back and forth between the sets, spectacular. People are saying their lines very believably, but I just felt this is kind of like a well-made robot handing out the narrative. And again, it's impressive. Technically, it's very efficient. Willie Valentine was pretty charming in a lot of his scenes, but I didn't particularly care about the story. I didn't want it to move forward. I was really just more fascinated by the time period and the historical details, because I'm not from California, but I want to start doing acting and writing and directing. So for me, this is like, I couldn't get enough stuff in terms of the background, learning more about these inside Hollywood stories, about these quirky individuals within that time frame. But again, I think this was done better with Magnolia, Inherent Vice, him revisiting that late 60s, early 70s period and the way things dramatically changed. Been done before, he did it better. I think Boogie Nights is probably the best one because I'm most fascinated by late 70s into the 80s, so I was most engaged with that. But, if you have to choose between the two, I would pick seeing Licorice Pizza again. I think there's a lot I missed and things I'd enjoy again, but it does feel like middling PTA. But I would say if he gets the director, if he does get the Oscar, he does deserve it. He over deserves it for many other films. But with others like Belfast and West Side Story, it just feels like really big names just getting the Oscar as a vanity prize. It doesn't feel like they deserve it. They might deserve it for other projects, and maybe Kenneth Branagh is overdue as well, but Belfast really doesn't deserve this much praise. It just felt really weak. It was sentimental and nice, but in terms of the coming of age theme, West Side Story and Licorice did a much superior job. To me, Belfast really felt like style over substance and not worth revisiting. So I hope PTA wins because at least he has earned it. So I think Jane Campion deserves to win because she made the best film. But if PTA gets it, I won't be mad. He's probably the second strongest. It's a thinner competition, but it was well done in many places, so I would recommend it. Much more over West Side Story, but yeah, I think Power of the Dog will win, should win. I hope PTA does win, though, because, again, between those two, I'm kind of torn. He does deserve it, but not for this one. But if he gets it, that at least I would feel would be just. It makes sense. But if the other ones win, besides Power of the Dog, I'm shocked. Snyder should win. Denis Villeneuve should win way more than these other people, in my humble opinion.